Welcome to episode 69 of Fizzy's Wacky World of Wrestling. My name is William Fizzpatrick, and hello, folks. Apologies for being away for a long time again, but I had some understandable reasons as to why. So, end of May rolls around, I do a podcast, beginning of June happens, I had some stuff come up, and then in the middle of June, I got my first dosage of the protection from Ryback in 19, so I got my first dose of the vaccine. My arm felt like it had been jammed with a pickaxe for several days, so obviously I couldn't do any podcasting that week or the week afterwards. And it was a shorter month than expected, so I'm here now, back for the Tour de Con today, and yes, it is a pun on the word of the Tour de France, which is currently actively going on right now, and I figured what better way to synergize the world of artificially enhanced cycling with artificially enhanced wrestling, and combine the two together as we take a look at the great cons known as Tony and Nick, both of whom are involved with two different wrestling promotions that we have talked about before on the show, AEW and WWE. So, for this perspective, we need to first talk about the events that happened in the beginning of June. Mainly the fire sale that WWE decided to do by releasing a large chunk of its roster, including several people that most individuals thought weren't going to be released at all, at least not for the next year or so. I guess we should probably start off with the big one. The literal big one, the monster of man or something. The abominable Strowman, Braun Strowman. And for those of you in the state of New Jersey who've been wondering as to why that there have been fireworks celebrations going on for the last several weeks, with Symphony Number 9 playing in the background, and hallelujahs around, that's because Kane has been on a month-long celebration because one of his least favorite wrestlers on the WWE roster actually got released. Which is surprising, and not surprising, because if you actually look at it from a statistical perspective, big guy wrestlers, yes, this involves you in the data statistic, Ryback, pay attention. Big guy wrestlers usually end up being released by Vince much quicker than small guy wrestlers. Cruiserweights, international wrestlers, middleweights, light heavyweights, guys that have charisma and physique, they usually last a lot longer than the big giant wrestlers, unless they have some kind of name recognition value or ability to draw beyond the fact that they are big, massive, and can take a loss at WrestleMania every year. So, they really didn't have anything for Braun. That was the problem with him, is that they didn't really have anything for him, because in most of these situations, and allow me to get my old man territory voice out, back in the olden days of wrestling, there was a thing known as the territory system, and the territories had all these wrestlers go through the areas every few months or so. And they wrestled the top guys and had the pinfalls at the end of the month and lost the loser leaves title match. And then you got your next big guy and had your next feud 3 to 6 months later, or for an entire year if you're doing a big program with one of the other promotions. Then the big giant wrestler would go over to the next territory and the next territory, keeping the name value fresh. Because there wasn't them newfangled cable or satellite TV back in the day. There was only regional networks on local television stations sponsored by the big companies. So back in those days, you had regional stations doing regional pro wrestling coverage, usually around 5 to 7 p.m., depending on when they did their local news programs. And they needed something to show besides the national programming, so a lot of them did a lot of in-house wrestling promotions. I mean, Pittsburgh was famous for having an in-house wrestling promotion on one of their TV stations. The same could be said for St. Louis. and for Florida, and for Texas. A lot of the major markets had regional territory promotions that were later spun off into independent territory promotions that primarily did their business through untelevised house shows. That's why house shows exist. The house shows were usually the ones that made the money throughout the year, while the TV shows were basically free advertising, essentially, to get the names out of to who these wrestlers actually are, instead of generic guy in trunks A fighting against generic guy in trunks B with some random manager and some goofy gimmick. And you would do this, and you would build up to those house shows, those major main events at the stadiums and arenas, and you might show a highlight from those particular shows if you decided to bring your recording equipment along. Example, Mid-South did this a lot during their territory days. And a lot of the old school wrestling fans have probably just had their jaws hit the floor because, wait, he shouldn't know that. I did my research. When I came over from tabletop gaming into professional wrestling in 2009 to 2010, I studied hard. And I researched a lot about the variety of territories from a distance level. I didn't go in depth into a lot of them because primarily I was watching Impact at the time and didn't want to get too more committed into an investment. But I was able to find a lot of free wrestling matches from the olden days on YouTube and be able to watch those old programs and get a general understanding of how the mechanics of professional wrestling works. This should make a lot of you very nervous by now because, again, I know how the game works. Okay, my grandfather was one of the most infamous carnies on the antique business side of things in Western New York on my dad's side of the family from the 1960s to the early to mid 2000s when he passed away. Okay, I understand carny lingo. I understand how carnies operate. That should make you all really nervous by now, if it hasn't already. So, because these big guy wrestlers don't have that system, and because the other promotions around have national TV deals, guys who would previously be not exposed get exposed. They get exposed for work rate, they get exposed for promo ability, and they basically have to string together promos that basically go in, I will crush my opponent into dust, and I will be the world champion. What line do I do next? The blinky thing is broken. Yes, the blinky thing, also known as the teleprompter. That's why you have managers, but managers cost about $330K or sometimes into the $740K figure amounts, and those managers also have. See, along with the heel wrestlers, the heel managers also got to go to various different territories and do different variations on their acts. They didn't just do the same act over and over again, they did some variation. I mean, for example, if you put the Grand Wizard of Wrestling, Ernie Roth, into a situation where he's in a territory in California, he'll do a different style of gimmick. He'll still have the turban and the sunglasses, but again, it will be different because he has a different ability to gain heat from a different subset of the audience, or the main audience in that particular instance. Another example is Freddie Blassie. Guy has to basically go with an armed police escort in San Francisco and Los Angeles because the Los Angeles territory was Freddie Blassie's main territory because he worked for Gene LaBelle as a wrestler. In New York, he has to go with a different style of. He would do heel managing in California territories, and he wouldn't use the foreign wrestlers. He would use mainly the American wrestlers or the wrestlers who proclaim themselves to be Russians, you know. In the New York territory, however, he primarily did business with the Samoans. He did business with the other heel wrestlers that were from the international neck of the woods. I mean, you wouldn't see the Iron Sheik and Nikola Volkov in the Los Angeles territory, even though Blassie did manage them later on in the mid-'80s. He wouldn't be managing those wrestlers. It would be somebody else. It would be like some fake Russian or some fake Iranian who would be managing those guys in those territories. Another example would probably be, let me think his name. As far as Blassie and the Grand Wizard of Wrestling, and oh, of course, Lou Albano. Lou Albano had the Wild Samoans. He had a bunch of other tag team wrestlers. He primarily focused on those ones, but he would have different wrestlers in different territories. As far as those wrestlers, every heel manager had a different entourages of wrestlers that they would manage in different territories. So if you look at old archive film, you'd be like, wow, this is really different. This is really different. I mean, this guy is managing this guy here, and, in this territory, and he's going on this particular instance here, and it's like, you wonder to yourself as to how this is actually happening. And it's like, like, for example, Gary Hart. Gary Hart was a manager who managed primarily Japanese wrestlers in World Class Championship Wrestling. But he would also manage non-Japanese wrestlers in other territories. In WCW, he managed not only Southern heels, but also the Japanese wrestlers as well, such as Muda and Great Kabuki. And he would make sure to explain in detail as to why he had brought these individuals on board for his, evil empire. Every storyline in those days was done in a very concise manner. Midgard face gets attacked by the heel, establishes the heel. Heel goes through several weeks where they literally squash every single jobber in the territory worth their salt, and some that probably weren't worth their salt. And then he also feuds with the mid-card babyface. He then feuds with the leaving mid-card babyface, or babyface that was going to turn heel later on in the year, and knocks them out of the territory for temporarily amount of time. And then they face against the top face, and either they win the championship, or they lose to the top face, or they gain a cheating win on the top face that is disputed, and you go into your main event, and that builds up to your main event supercard. And supercards weren't really a thing until the 80s, but there were prototype versions of those supercards back in the 60s and 70s, where you would build your shows to something around the end of the year because you were aware that the winter was coming. In the Northern Territories, you'd build your shows at the beginning of November. Late October, early November, and maybe having a Christmas show in between in December. That was basically your final show until at least mid to late January. You'd have a couple months off there from running events. Some people did their shows in September, some people did their end shows in October. It really depended on the territory, the owner, and the amount of money that the owner and promoter was willing to spend to make your mainline main event card happen. You'd have your shows in the summer, which were your big sellers. Those were the ones that basically generated your income for next year, your expenditures for next year. The expenses that you would have to spend in order to get your card ready for next year. And that business side of professional wrestling is something that a lot of people really don't understand how it works and how to gradually plan for 3 to 5 years down the road when your top face is going to be too old. You're going to have to replace him with a younger baby face. You're going to have to replace your heels. And you're going to have to cycle through veterans and rookies and fill-in players into your rotation and hope that they develop so that your territory continues to make some money. Because the troubling thing with wrestling promotions, and both AEW and WWE are currently into this problem, yes, they're multi-million, billion-dollar wrestling corporations, okay? They're basically natural, or in some cases unnatural, microeconomies. I don't consider them monopolies because both of these promotions have almost died on multiple occasions. I mean, if something doesn't break right, then both AEW and WWE are out of business within 2 years. And their assets are sold to somebody else who has to make hides or hairs of what the literal heck this is. And that's always been the constant problem. The only people who are even remotely interested in investing in wrestling are carnies, confidence men, con artists, the kind of people who will literally bribe their way to millions upon millions of dollars because they are obsessed with that power, that glory, that attention, that prestige of owning one of the big wrestling promotions. And that's how it was back in the day. You get somebody who was the son or a grandson of a professional wrestling owner, or you'd get some big fan who owned a corporation and was willing to siphon off a few $100,000 to invest in this wrestling promotion through possible illegitimate means, not really implying anything. Of course, I'm certainly implying something. And the trouble is, with these wrestling promotions, is that primarily their investors are people who have rap sheets so long that they could be mistaken for rolls of toilet paper. That's what you deal with in terms of professional wrestling. I know you see all these indie wrestling fans screaming at the top of their lungs, "Oh, it's so horrible, corporate wrestling, they doing all of these different things." Yes, because they can afford it. Okay? Indie wrestling's biggest thing that they need to start paying attention to is how in the literal heck do you make your promotion last for 5 years? And that's going to lead to some very uncomfortable questions about long-term sustainability in the markets that you happen to be touring in. And you have to start thinking like territory promotions. How exactly do you manage to expand your market so that your wrestlers can get paid properly, and that you don't have to pull the stunts that promotions such as Chikara pulled by basically training the wrestlers and saying, "Oh, by the way, here's this indentured servitude clause. You have to pay us over $2,000 to $4,000 just to break even on your wrestling career. We'll pay you peanuts, and you work for us, and you have to be totally 100% committed to your old gimmick, or I'm going to drop this entire safe on your head and crush you like a literal bug. Now put on this ant costume." I swear, Willy Wonka's Chocolate Factory is a better run example of a business with less horrors involved than freaking Chikara. A promotion that went bust last year because of the speaking out movement, because they found out that the owner was doing inappropriate things with the female talent. Also, allegations of racism, bigotry, all this other kind of stuff that was happening. This is what happens when a person's brain ends up in comic book land. Yes. I say this from personal experience. If I hear anybody involved in the pro wrestling industry happens to be either from video games or comic books, I will immediately be extremely suspicious of them. Video games, comic books, or tabletop gaming. Immediately my suspicion level goes up 10,000 points. Because I've been in tabletop gaming before, and I don't trust anybody who comes from that field. Because they are literally the ultimate embodiment of the wretched hive of scum and villainy that not even Mos Eisley Space Sports Bar would allow admitted entry into, because they are that much of a wretched hive of scum and villainy. Along with the fact that, you can't really clean up the tables and stuff like that. Oh boy. So, we're talking about the two Khans today, Nick and Tony. I think we should probably talk about Nick Khan first. Nick Khan has ended up in a very unenviable position for anybody who is even remotely involved in the business world. You have taken on the task of trying to revive a wrestling company that has been in decline for the last 15 years and has been hemorrhaging funds like crazy. Yes, they have made a lot of money. They made a lot of money last year. They made a lot of money the year before, and they'll continue to make a lot of money. Here's the problem with making a lot of money. Your investors suddenly go, "Hang on a second, you have enough money to pay me back for all those investments I gave you years ago." And as much as people like to bemoan investors, WWE is a publicly traded company. Why wouldn't they pay back their investors? I mean, look, they don't want to be labeled as a Ponzi scheme, now would they? Okay, you pay back your investors and you pay back your percentages to them. Yes, the investors are not in major control of the company. Vince McMahon has been smart enough to actually invest shares so that, top shares so that he has majority control over the company. So now you bring in Nick Khan, who basically defeated George Barrios in gladiatorial combat to gain his position. And, no, he wasn't there before when Barrios got fired, but, you like to imagine that that Barrios was involved in some kind of gladiatorial combat with Nick Khan. He's now investing in bowling alleys with Michelle Wilson, the other person who got fired from WWE last year. In what was one of the great endings of the Barrios Bingo Collective, Every economic wrestling analyst is now screaming into the winds, "Why, Vince? Why? Bingo nights were so great." So, yeah. So, Barrios is now investing in bowling alleys. If he invests in bingo parlors, the great prophecy shall now be fulfilled. And Nick is now in the unenviable task of now having to cut contracts because of the fact that NBC Universal and Fox are now putting a lot of pressure on WWE to downsize their operation. Whether it be for a potential sale or just because they're going, "You worked up that big of a restaurant tab, Vince? What are you doing? And why are you letting your idiot son-in-law do all this stuff down in NXT? We're losing money." NBC Universal is extremely upset with the results that NXT has been doing over the last several months. I mean, they want to beat Warner Media, Turner Collective, whatever the heck that thing, Warner Discovery thing. They want to beat them bad. And to see that their yellow and orange brand, yellow and black brand is struggling to beat a promotion that is barely 3 years old is something that many executives are literally chewing their fingernails and eating every pencil imaginable in their office and wondering why exactly the lead poisoning hasn't hit them yet, because they're like, "We're losing so much money. How is it that this shovel-headed idiot and his band of scrubs aren't able to beat this massive promotion? It's a startup promotion. How are we losing to a startup promotion? This is the third league brand and it can barely beat a startup promotion." NXT has a major problem. They have now caught the attentions of the investors, and they're wondering exactly the same thing as everybody else is wondering. "Hunter, what the heck are you doing down at Full Sail?" You've got all of these wrestlers in their mid-30s who would normally be signed to Impact and would be, in a promotion that can get you a 1.3 to a 1.9 rating, another 9.8 or something like that, but not in a promotion that is this mainstream as NXT is. And NXT is a mainstream promotion. The hardcore fans latched onto it like a alien parasite, and it basically said, "Oh, we don't like Raw and SmackDown. We prefer NXT. Now give us the xenomorph parasites, Hunter. Give us our plain bread vanilla cruiserweights. Give us more Gargano and Adam Cole, baby." Although with Roderick Strong becoming the head of a heel faction, it seems that nature is indeed finally healing, or that common sense has finally hit NXT and they realize, "Oh shoot, we have a bland, boring champion who looks like a Vegas bouncer and his entourage. Please, Vince, bring them up." I mean, Vince is going down into Full Sail, apparently with an extra security entourage, so they've gotten smart enough to realize that they need to protect the native Floridians from Vince McMahon, lest they have another Arab Spring incident, like they did the last time they went to Saudi Arabia. Again, I'm still wondering, and I'm pretty sure that every Arab warlord in that province is still wondering, "Prince, why did you bring a guy who has a literal personality of an Arab warlord into our country that disrupted everything? If you wanted to sign an American sponsor, why not just go for IndyCar? Just to, give a double bird to F1. Because they've been having troubles, establishing a Grand Prix in the Arab Peninsula with the Bahrain Grand Prix and as well as some of the other ones. But, it's like, okay, Vince is going down there to scout for talent after some major roster releases have happened. I mean, Strowman being released, that's a big surprise. I mean, but it's also kind of not a big surprise because big guys like Strowman usually last only about 3 to 5 years, on average. In most of the cases, they usually last maybe 2 years, are used for several major feuds, and then thrown into the lower mid-card. Welcome to Purgatory, also known as Big Show and Mark Henry Land. We hope you enjoy it here in this land where you're eating cruiserweights and getting involved in pointless feuds over action figures. Our creative team is now literally hitting their heads on the walls, wondering what in the literal heck we're doing. So, at the moment right now, WWE is now exiting the Thunderdome. I'm pretty certain that the Australians are extremely happy about this news. So are the Floridians. As WWE unleashes itself upon the grand stage of the world as the world tour resumes after a year off because of the, well, pandemic. And, WWE being stuck in Florida for nearly a year. I'm certain the Floridians are very happy about this news development. I mean, because they're literally stuck in a situation where they have to appease the carnies. The carnival folk that usually stay in the summer and instead have decided to stay for much longer. Much to everyone else's eye-rolling, oh goodness gravy, what are they doing here moments. So of the other releases, you have Aleister Black, who never really fit in to the main roster. He was an NXT guy that they decided to draft up to the main roster because he had the cool gimmick. But the thing is that Aleister Black was already into severe decline because of chronic foot problems. He kept having foot injuries. He was basically the NXT equivalent of Rusev, where he constantly got hurt. Minor shoulder problems, knee issues, plantar fasciitis, all those other kind of stuff that happens. So basically, NXT was stuck in a situation where they had to bring this guy up, and the main roster had little to no idea as to what to do with this guy. I mean, do you make him a babyface or do you make him a heel, He doesn't really have the prototypical size for being a heel, and we already have Seth Rollins, and that is already enough of a flaming disaster as is, so Seth Rollins but gothic. And I mean, he does have talent. Tommy End certainly does have talent. But the thing is that he's a guy who would normally be seen on the regional upper indie levels and on the second tier promotions like Impact, Ring of Honor, and of course AEW, which now everybody is dreading him going to AEW because he opened up about his experiences. He didn't really have anything bad to say about WWE management except for the fact that they didn't seem to really understand his gimmick. And came up with all of these different ideas, which the fans have interpreted as screaming into the void because, they've been really angered by all of the stuff involving Bray Wyatt's Fiend, Carnival, House of Horrors style gimmick that, WWE is trying to tap into the indie horror business. Indie horror movies, those types of hardcore fans, because they know that they're devoted to the product, they know that they have, they know that they have all of those, people that they can go to, and they will support the industry because they like indie horror. They like schlocky, questionable storylines involving Randy Orton burning down a house again, or Alexa Bliss talking to a doll. I'm glad that Peekaboo finally got work. I mean, she'd been working in Shimmer for years, never getting the recognition that she deserved. But, having a situation where you don't have anything to do for your late 30s MMA prospect in Shayna Baszler, who's, again, she's a perfect fit for NXT because she is about as interesting as a loaf of bread. Her matches are dull from a technical standpoint, but again, that's what Hunter craves. He craves dull main events. The Triple H specials. Of course, now you have Shawn Michaels, who somehow has become the voice of reason in that creative team, and the supposedly retired Gabe Spokowski from Evolve and the WWN programs. May the China theme literally be ringing into your ears as you wait for the pay-per-view to start after it's been delayed by an hour and a half because they forgot to set up the cage early. Yes. If you know anything about his time at Evolve, you literally know the Crazy Gabe experience more so than everybody else. Although, interestingly, a lot of Evolve's storylines have now ended up in AEW because the wrestlers who wrestled in Evolve are now doing those storylines in a promotion with slightly more consistent booking. I say slightly because, again, you're trusting the Canadian from Winnipeg, the Bucks, and that Rhodes boy to do competent booking, along with all the other people that they brought in from WWE's, veteran core, in order to stabilize their situation. As I talked about last episode with AEW, Tony Khan ended up in a bad situation when Brody Lee passed away. because Brody Lee was basically intended to be the successor. He was supposed to be one of their main road agents because he had a good idea about the business, and he basically was winding down his career. I mean, this is a guy who had been wrestling at a high level since the early 2000s in Rochester, so naturally it just seemed like he was going to do this thing with the higher power, the Exalted One for the Dark Order, get the Dark Order back on track, have the Dark Order turn face, and then, have Brody Lee basically job out of the territory. I think what they intended originally with Chris Daniels was actually originally meant for the Exalted One, because it was clear to me back a few years ago that Luke Harper, Brody Lee, didn't have much left. He had some good moments. He was a consummate professional, but his body was breaking down. He had issues with his kneecap. And I noticed those breathing problems, which I got really worried about because I was like, oh boy, he's gassed. And we noticed in matches where he was in, he was like, oh boy, he's gassed. And we didn't know it was any kind of serious issue, but we were kind of worried. Both me and my mom, when we watched his matches a few years ago, I believe it was around 2017 we started noticing that. And, so we looked at it from this perspective of, oh, great, he gets to go with his, up to AEW with his best friend and do this, Exalted One gimmick, his best friend being Chris Harrington, a.k.a. Mookie Aganya, who now works for AEW as a VP. So I'm really glad they got to work that last year together before his sudden passing. I think it was great for him, and like I said, I've always been happy for Chris Harrington. Because, quite frankly, he was stuck on the independent scene for about 15 years as an economic analyst. He's in his late 30s. I felt like it was his time to get hired by a major promotion. And it certainly wasn't going to be WWE because of how critical he's been of their economics. I mean, mention the words WWE film finances in front of the man and see what happens. Hint, he works in stand-up comedy. I think getting crushed by a 10,000-pound safe is probably very likely at that point. Again, there are some worlds that you do not try to cross, and stand-up comedians and theater people are probably some of the people that you don't cross with. Personal experience speaking, because again, I've worked in community theater. My mom worked in community theater, won an award, and I've had experiences with arts and theater beforehand. So, yeah. Last thing you want to do is end up in a red paint can and basically be used as have your blood used as an interpreted art piece. So, yeah, AEW. They took a lot of chances on a lot of veteran workers who were, at the end of their rope, basically. You can gimmick a lot of matches to make them look a lot better than they actually are. You've got Methuselah, Chris Daniels, in another Tour of Dirty. He did this retirement angle, and now Frankie Kazarian is doing the, what is it? He's doing the Kenny Omega Hunter gimmick, which is basically the Bullet Club Hunter gimmick that Yoshitatsu had when he was in New Japan. Creatively, they're doing okay. They're running through their angles. They're running through their gimmicks. They're trying to make sure that Cody doesn't do anything insane because his angles typically tend to get a lot of backlash because of how weirdly booked they are in most situations. And the backlash that he had with this Anthony Ogario boxer versus wrestler match, British boxer who hates the America versus the patriotic American who's just cuts this really weird rambling promo, So, yeah, they got problems. I mean, the top half of their card is as interesting to me as paint drying. I don't mind them. I mean, I think that Jon Moxley has definitely turned a corner with me. A guy who I thought had consistently average matches in WWE has had great matches in AEW, barring anything involving explosions. I still don't know why they decided to hire a person who installed children's birthday party sparklers around the ring and a My First Magic kit set for smoke effects. But again, I wondered, okay, guys, you're going to have a receipt and it's going to be from the form of Onita, Grandpa Explosions showing up unannounced, and an FMW-style match is going to suddenly occur in your building. And same thing for WWE. AEW is actually leaving their Jacksonville venue and is going out on tour. They're heading out to places like Rochester. They're heading out to places, I think Pittsburgh is another place that they're going to. Britt Baker's hometown. You know, they've had some bad breaks. I mean, their women's division basically ended up in the infirmary for the first year of their existence. And it seems that the only momentum that they can do is, like, if Britt Baker does hardcore matches, which, again, I'm like, well, it's just like they've had this weird issue where they're trying to cross the streams. They're trying to cross the streams of Joshi promotional tactics, which don't work in the Americas, with sort of hardcore WWE style, WCW, WWE style hardcore wrestling mixed into it, with Lucha Underground style theatrical stuff thrown in. And it's just either not works, doesn't work, or you have situations where the talent that is there, I mean, Tyra Conti has managed to revive her career. And it's because they basically have let her be Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu MMA person who looks pretty, but also is capable of kicking your face off. And that's who they have. They have female wrestlers who are not archetypical fitting of the role. I mean, Britt Baker's most notable for being a dentist, as well as being one of the most Southern-style heel wrestlers who has ever Southern-style heel wrestled, who isn't from North Carolina. Because she's from Pennsylvania. So, what's interesting in this situation is that Tony has done the exact opposite of Nick. He's investing in a lot of young performers. He's buying out a lot of contracts. He's bringing in people who are young guys who can be developed. I mean, they're essentially doing... I've called AEW an expansion hockey franchise before, but that's because AEW has done all of this expansion hockey stuff. They brought in a bunch of veterans who could basically be placeholders and fillers for the first couple of years. Some of these guys can be long-term guys that can be used as draws to bring in older audience members. And what's interesting about AEW is their biggest problem right now is that the older fans really do not like this promotion. And it's mainly because of Tony. I don't know why. I mean, I got no issue with the guy. Okay? I just figured that if this business went bust, that every single wrestler employed was going to end up on the Jacksonville Jaguars roster and was going to end up starting games. Cody Rhodes crushed underneath defensive tackles after another rambling promo as the quarterback. That's what I figured, okay? Was going to happen in this situation. I figured that Chris Statlander was probably going to be playing wide receiver for the Jacksonville Jaguars. It's probably better than the ones they have right now. I figured that Tim Tebow would be clotheslined by one of the Revival. And somebody would be, taking over their tight end spot. But the fact that AEW has worked out a lot better than people expected it to, because there just were so many combustible parts to this, has been rather surprising. Rather extraordinary. But that's because Khan brought in the right management people to run the business side of the promotion and be able to say, no, we are not going to have Kenny Omega be strapped to a rocket and launch him out of Cape Canaveral. That's completely stupid. We're not doing that angle. Even though it would be exciting, and there would be a literal explosion like Challenger. Although, because he's Canadian, he probably will regenerate in the swamps, and we'll have to deal with some kind of Canadian-infused swamp monster in our main event scene again. While the swamp monster cries in the corner as he's not being booked. Yes, there actually was a wrestler named Swamp Monster, and he mainly wrestled in Chikara, showcasing just how badly that they misplaced their talent. So yeah, you have a bunch of wrestlers who come from the wreckages of Chikara. You have wrestlers who come from the wreckages of Impact. Although, interestingly, WWE has essentially become Neo Impact. I mean, I've openly joked about this with my friends. I mean, me and fellow longtime Impact sufferer Claire Elizabeth, she and I have, since the very beginning, watched Impact. And we both endured and survived this promotion that just had such nonsensical bookings and Grandpa Deathlock Sting in every single main event tag match. feels like home. I'm glad that AEW at least was sensible enough to bring Sting to AEW, because he just fits this promotion. Gets to be the mentor figure for Darby Allin, basically as sort of a manager figure, because he was that in Impact. He was actually kind of a manager figure for a number of years there. It just was not official. And that was just a screwdriver that just fell on the ground there. So you have Sting in AEW. You have Taz betraying everything that he stands for and managing a bunch of body guys. Ethan Page, Scorpio Sky, and somebody else have become part of this Team Power or Evil Power Rangers faction. And AEW has focused on factions primarily, because factions are what gives you the ability to do storylines in a long-term fashion without having to sacrifice mid-carders and main eventers in order to cycle through and have only like maybe 2 or 3 people in the main event slots instead of 4 or 5, which is the optimum amount, 4 or 5 or 6, because you never know when your main event stars are going to have to go under the knife because of some kind of horrible long-term injury. And with a lot of their main event guys being in their 30s or 40s, or in Chris Jericho's case, I think he's in his 50s, you can't really rely on your old guys being at the top of the card, and your young guys, well, they have got such a good farm system. I mean, AEW's farm system is just so much better than NXT's, and it's not out of any kind of like fanboyism or anything. I watch Dark and Elevation. That's primarily the shows I like watching. I like watching Dark. I like watching Elevation. I would watch NXT if the booking wasn't so baffling, or they were pushing stars that I actually, I'm interested in. I mean, the only one that I'm really interested in is the rebadged Sam Shaw, and that's because he's probably the sanest person on that roster. Yes, him. Samuel Shaw of Impact fame. He's the sanest one, and he's involved in a romance triangle with Indy Hartwell, who is a part of some kind of weird Addams Family group that Johnny Gargano and Candice LeRae are leading, with Austin Theory, who's still here, even though he has allegations against him. Yes, the speaking out variety. He has at least one allegation on him, but the problem is, when it comes to those kind of allegations, you need multiple sources. Multiple individuals coming forward and saying, okay, is this person doing something horrible? So, yeah. So Nick has decided to do the opposite. He's cutting costs. He's cutting 205 Live's cost. He's cutting a lot of the guys that were there from the very beginning who had very high salaries. I mean, people say, but WWE made so much money. Yes, but the thing is, investors are calling due on those bills. They have bills to pay, and there's a lot of bills that they're going to pay. And WWE has to renegotiate contracts with arena vendors, and they need to renegotiate with wrestlers, and they need to renegotiate with... And Nick has realized that they need a smaller roster in order to compete with AEW, and they need to basically have, when guys are filled with their AEW tenure, they can bring them back over to WWE and have a run with them over there. I feel like there's going to be a lot more releases of major guys over the next couple of months, and some of them are not going to end up in AEW, some of them are going to end up in Impact. I mean, that's basically what their current situation is right now, is that a lot of these people, I think the Iconics are going to end up in Impact. Woe to anybody who has to listen to their promos and their irritating banshee-like voices. Then you have the possibility of guys like, we don't know still what's going on with the deranged lawn gnome Daniel Bryan. Is he going to be ending up in Impact, or is he going to be making a quick stay to AEW? Nobody's really sure what he's doing. Samoa Joe's back at NXT because NXT threw such a fit about him being released. You've got wrestlers like Ruby Riott who got released. Ruby Riott is a very serviceable mid-tier wrestler who you can probably bring over to AEW and have her, in the same role in NXT and WWE, in her role in WWE. Because, again, you can't trust her shoulder. Her shoulder has had chronic injury issues since her Shimmer days. You can't trust that shoulder's going to hold if you're going to give her a sustained run. And given that AEW's women's roster is literally the equivalent of the injury ward, I mean, it's like the 1976 Tampa Bay Buccaneers in terms of injured reserve for that women's division. And they have the talent, they have the skill. Trouble is, can they stay healthy? Can they actually sustain momentum in order to, have a grassroots run similar to WWE's women's division? You're seeing what happens when that grassroots run has its natural end course, and you have to replace them with wrestlers that are nowhere near ready for that position. I mean, Rhea Ripley, hello. I mean, at least Bianca Belair can rely on charisma and some good ring skills in order to be at the top position, because Sasha Banks is MIA. Bayley is a serviceable upper-level heel who is great at heel work, but at the same time, people really want to cheer her again. And Charlotte is literally the creature from the Blonde Lagoon. And Becky, charismatic as all heck, but again, she's a wrestler who is very mercurial. Her wrestling ability is okay, it's average. Sometimes great with the right opponent. But you're expecting her to have great matches post-pregnancy with these young kids? I think she can, certainly. But what exactly do you do with her? Do you have her feud with Ripley? Do you have her feud with Belair? What are you going to do with her? I mean, congratulations on tying the marriage knot with Seth Rollins, who is very likely going to be circumcised with a pair of pruning shears by Vince. Him and Punch's husband. They're being chased around the hallways as we speak by Vince because, Seth, you just cost him one of his moneymakers. And now he's going to do, what Vince does, what Satan does. Circumcise you with a pair of garden shears. How unfortunate. So Nick is having to do cost cutting. He's having to bring in fresh talent from the main roster. There are many wrestlers who are currently getting overhauls on their gimmick. You have a writer openly admitting to not knowing what wrestlers they're writing for and not really understanding the business all that well. That person got released. Talent and agents were annoyed at that. Understandably so. I mean, you're trying to pitch your character and your gimmick and your storylines to this writer, and you're not sure exactly what the resume of their history is. I mean, the main event scene for Raw is okay. Bobby Lashley has been a solid champion, same as Drew McIntyre was last year during the pandemic. It's just that nobody's really sure how to continue everything, so that's why they're doing the shakeups with Money in the Bank this year. To which this pay-per-view actually has something of a point to it. It actually gives them the opportunity to shake things up again. And also the draft is coming up in a couple of weeks, so we don't know exactly what's going to happen right there. Obviously, some wrestlers from NXT are probably going to be drafted ahead of time. So, yeah. Everything's up in the air right now with WWE. And as far as AEW goes, they're kind of in this lull where they're trying to figure out what to do with themselves. They've got a champion in Kenny Omega who's doing this crossover angle with Impact. Welcome to the madness of the Impact Zone, Kenneth. Welcome to Purgatory. I mean, the enjoyment of Kenny Omega being stuck in Purgatory aside, the trouble that they have right now is that they're in so many different directions that people are now basically, like in WWE, they're forming fiefdoms and tribes and trying to basically proclaim that their brand of wrestling is the best. They're basically Iron Sheiking the whole situation. Cruiserweight wrestling is number one. Heavyweight wrestling. Hark fooey. They're doing that kind of stuff. Whereas I'm like, folks, chill out. We just had a major, sex scandal happen last year. 1 year anniversary of Speaking Out, obviously. There's a lot of things right now that we need to start thinking about what we're doing long-term in both the short-term and long-term. And a lot of uncomfortable conversations are going to have to start happening. And it's going to be with people who are completely ill-prepared And I'm not talking about the two major promotions. They've got lawyers. They have lawyers that are smart enough. I mean, ROH's lawyer team, I have definitely think are the hidden MVPs of the 2020 season. Complained about Sinclair and all their other issues aside, their legal team basically said, okay, we have a booker who's been charged with fiddling around with minors. Let's let his visa expire, and basically say to him that he is completely unwelcome in this promotion. They handled the Marty Scurll situation brilliantly. Because that's exactly what you have to do. You basically have to go, all right, we are going to let this story die down. We are then going to do exactly what we're going to do. We are going to fire this individual out of a cannon and into the sun. And they can be stuck on that little island over in Britain because their visa's expired. And they need another one. And let the wannabe trading card company fund their little excursion. So, allegedly, Scurll got signed for the juniors division of New Japan, which very quickly ended up ballooning into something else. They basically pulled him away from the tapings. And it's like, everybody is going, well, nothing's changing, or this, that, and the other things. No, there's change happening. It's just a lot of change that is going to be very uncomfortable for people to deal with over the next couple months. Because people who've been just in the background, looking, studying, researching, eyeing things over as a proper intelligent individuals are, they've been waiting. And that includes this program. I said it before and I'll say it again. I'm not happy with professional wrestling. Not happy right now. There are definitely things that can be changed, and will be changed. And it's probably going to involve some people who are your favorites. And it's probably going to involve some people who think that they're doing the right things, but in fact are just allowing the abusers to go back and re-abuse. Why haven't those people had their feet thrown to the fire yet? The people who openly preyed on minorities, the mentally disabled, the young minors, young kids who aren't really sure what they're doing with themselves, are so uncertain, have so many issues from their grade school level educations. I feel upset about those people being taken advantage of. And it's been one very consistent thing about me is I've always fought for them. I've never been asked to, because I don't feel like I need to be asked to help people. I've saved so many people over the years from professional wrestling who allowed themselves to be literally consumed by the beast because of their insecurities, because of their issues. And I've been sitting back, waiting, biding my time. Because if there is one thing that everybody knows about me is that I'm very patient. I have the patience of a monk. I have the patience of every saint known to mankind. And on this Tour de Con, and there's a reason why that episode is titled as such. Do you know how long the Tour de France is? It's a 2,000-mile bike ride over 3 weeks. Back in the olden days of the 80s and 90s. I'm not sure how it is now. I think it's probably still the same way. But it's an over 2,000-mile bike ride through some of the most inhospitable territory in France and other countries, depending on who hosts it that year. You have to climb up some really steep mountains. And if there is one thing I'm really good at is climbing up the highest, most impossible peaks imaginable. To actually do the things that are to be done. So yeah. I'm just waiting. And maybe this summer, on the start of the Summer of Wacky, we have the Tour de Fizz. The Tour de Fizzy. Because I will probably be taking a look at a couple of other promotions. And probably screaming at the top of my lungs at their incredible inadequacies when it comes to business management, or talent relations, or just general goals of achieving. The goal of a professional wrestling promotion is to provide goods and services. They are to provide services to service workers who are trying to make a living in the theatrical field of professional wrestling. They are not strong enough to go into professional real fighting, so they have to go into professional wrestling, which is scripted matches. They want to be in theater. They want to be in the movies. They want to be doing theatrical work, and they don't want to get their head kicked in for real, so they go to professional wrestling. And goods in terms of providing a community with some stable jobs. I mean, you're doing events every few months. You have a support crew. You have workers working in your promotions. So it makes sense to have auxiliary people who have additional jobs, who are their regular jobs, earn a bit of extra money on the side, or volunteer because, it's in a market where you can't really afford to pay support workers. Because you have to pay your wrestlers, and your ring, and your turnbuckles, and the upfront cost of the arena and venue that is taking a chance on booking this professional wrestling show and hope that everything doesn't explode within 5 seconds. It is literally the biggest risk reward that you can do of running a wrestling promotion. And you hope that you break even, because in the first couple of years you're going to be breaking even. You're not going to be making a ton of money on this sort of thing. And I've never run a wrestling promotion before, but I know that. It's Basic Business Economics 101. You can read it in Lee Iacocca's autobiography, the first one. You put a product out there that is sellable to a general audience. You gain a hardcore audience that generally likes the product and wants to continue supporting it because they really feel that that product connects with them. And you move forward. You try some experimentation. You try to make sure to keep every market open. And that's the big conundrum in wrestling right now, is that there seems to be this idea that everybody wants to sell plain vanilla ice cream. Everybody likes to sell plain vanilla ice cream. They want to sell just one flavor. And every time that somebody opens their voice and says, well, I want rainbow. I want Rainbow Bridge Rocky Road. And that ice cream provider says, well, we don't sell that. We sell vanilla. Plain old vanilla wrestling and every single alternate in professional wrestling is selling you the same flavor. Oh, we just have plain old hardcore wrestling. We aren't selling anything else. Oh, we just have cruiserweight wrestling. We don't sell anything else. We just have heavyweights that are as interesting as flan. We don't have anything else. They're all trying to sell the same flavors. It's like they're running a vegan restaurant. We have kale and some lettuce that we have sourced from some organic farm. That'll be $8, please. And we have this plain vanilla yogurt dressing. I mean, everybody's trying to just sell one thing instead of trying to appeal to multiple markets. Sure, you're not going to get as much market share, but it's going to provide you with better streams of with more streams of income, as well as other audience members, because when that main core audience that likes vanilla ice cream withers and is beheaded, much like the French Revolution, much like the kings and queens of France during the French Revolution, that audience is going to dry up. And you're sooner or later going to have to invest in a new audience. And that audience is going to see that you're not offering much of anything. Just offering the same old, not offering much of anything. And these philosophical debates and rants by these different groups that are trying to cling on to whatever culture or tradition that they have, I just eyebrow raise them and go, both of you are wrong. And the workers are going to be the ones that ends up suffering because of your stupidity. Because you are heedless. Because you are reckless. Because you are prideful. Because you cannot stop yammering for 5 seconds and do the right thing for these people who are working in your industry. And I've been of the opinion that, yes, unionization is not the ultimate solution to the issues of labor in professional wrestling. It has to be smarter. Everything has to be done a little bit more smarter, a little bit more sensible, a little bit more practicality, a lot more in the way of background checks. When you run the charity promotion for ALS, you should be making sure that your promoter is not a registered sex offender. Yes, I'm referring to the Synergy Wrestling thing again. when you are running a charity for ALS or any other disability that involves children that are defenseless because of their condition, you make sure that that promoter isn't a registered sex offender. Takes you 5 seconds, and I don't care if he has an alias, he or she or they are having them have an alias. You find out. You find out. If my mother can go out online and takes 2 minutes to find out the background information of a convicted sex offender, then you can too. Same with me. Took me 5 minutes. I talked about this on episode 43, one of my favorite episodes that I've done on Wacky World. 5 minutes. Took me like 2 to 5 minutes to find out information for the state of Florida Sex Offender Registry. So yeah, there's some things that can definitely be improved, and they are being improved. Although if I keep hearing yammering from the people saying that wrestling isn't going to change, well, they get a nice free ride in a trebuchet. Enjoy the screaming because your pessimism is annoying me. Because you are part of the problem. And I will make sure that you are part of the solution, whether you like it or not. Again, like I said, uncomfortable questions are going to be asked. So this is basically just an essay piece on WWE and AEW as well as the indies. And if you're wondering as to why I'm so much harder on the indies than the satanic mega corporation promotion and the other not really satanic, kind of confused promotion that's sort of going through its teenage period at this point, it's because I have much higher standards for the indies. You babble so much about how elite and high end you are, and yet you can't even do basic things like background checks. You want to be considered better than the bigger promotions. How adorable. Prove it. Not with your words, with your actions. Expect that to be a topic of conversation over the next couple of months on this edition and on the next couple of editions of the show throughout the rest of this summer of Wacky. Because I'm just getting started. This has been episode 69 of Fizzy's Wacky World of Wrestling. Thank you for participating in the Tour de Con, folks. I hope you like this episode. I really feel like I'm getting back into a nice little groove. Oh, and for those of you who have been wondering, and I'm pretty certain that you have, let's give our very quick update about the Golden Albie Award recipient for Sumo Chaos in May of 2021, Asano Yama. Yes, him. I figured I basically used the very end of this show to basically showcase as to what was going on. Asano Yama has been suspended for 6 tournaments, starting at this tournament in July, and he will be basically in Upper Division 4 when he ends his suspension. He has been docked in pay, which means far less chakonabe and sushi dinners, and his coach has been fined a considerable amount of money. He's had 25% of his pay docked, and his old stable master has been removed from the world of sumo wrestling because of his incompetence. Apparently, he can't detect when a wrestler has somehow disappeared from nowhere. In Asano Yama, apparently the ultimate sumo ninja. Seriously. And people have been rather divided about this punishment. Everybody's like, well, he's an Ozeki. He'll destroy everybody in Division 4. You haven't considered that it's Asano Yama we're talking about. A guy that goes hot and cold so fast you'd think you'd be in an ice-cold water in Antarctica in the middle of a volcano. I'm not sure there's any way that he gets back up to Upper Division 2 within at least the next 2 years or so. He'll probably be back in Division 2 within 2 years. I don't think he gets it back in the first year, not with his hot and cold streaks. He might be in Upper Division 3 by the end of year 1. But everybody assuming that he's just going to bulldoze his way back to the top, it's not going to be that easy for him. It's not going to be like Abi. Abi at least didn't have any long-term injuries that he was dealing with. Asano Yama has a foot problem. Is the drive and dedication still there? Is he capable of going on a massive run to get back to his Ozeki rank? I mean, he's dedicating himself, obviously, rededicating. what happens with his stable. I mean, obviously, the current Takasago, he's, like, in a really bad situation of, like, oh, no, I inherited all these problems in this sumo stable. And as I said beforehand, and this is something I'm going to be talking about when we get to the Sumo U show for the July U show, which is starting, yes, in Nagoya. This is going to be the ultimate Chaos Yuso. I mean, Hakuho's last stand, Tennofuji trying to unseat him as the top Yokozuna because he's going on a Yokozuna bid for this Basho. Ura and Tokushoryu are back in Division 1. So many things could potentially happen that could literally unbalance everything. I mean, the sumo narrative is that Tennofuji beats Hakuho and they're stuck with another Mongolian Yokozuna for at least 2 years. And hoping and praying that the Japanese stables, hoping, praying, and also sacrificing every goat imaginable that some Japanese stable produces a Japanese Yokozuna that doesn't break his arm within the first year and a half. But we'll see how it goes, because the Japanese, the Sumo U show for July is going to be one of the shows that I talk about upcoming. So anyway, yes, this has been episode 69 of Fizzy's Wacky World of Wrestling, the Tour de Con. I thank you once again for joining me on this brief diversion into the world of sumo wrestling. I will obviously be talking a little bit more about that at the next edition of the show. And just waiting for the image here to flip back over to the regular title screen. Should probably be back here in about a second. Yes, there it is. Thank you all for watching. This has been William Fizzpatrick. You can follow me on Twitter at Fizzpatrick14. That's Fizzpatrick 14. And I've been inactive for like the month of June for the most part, and this show airing on June, almost July 1st. Happy July 1st, by the way, and happy 4th of July weekend. I may have another episode this week. I might not sure. But this has been episode 69 of Fizzy's Wacky World of Wrestling, the Tour de Con. I will now be beaten by the Mongol horde and a bunch of angry cyclists with French baguettes. Have a good day or night, ladies and gentlemen, and I'll see you for the next edition of Wacky World of Wrestling. Once again, this has been episode 69 of Fizzy's Wacky World of Wrestling, the Tour de Con. Bye, folks!